It is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. We are popping up another live. I apologize. We had some technical difficulty, but we are zooming in and focusing in on a new Peace and Harmony live, which has been much requested from our viewers. And so, hey, Dwayne, awesome. Cool. Yay. I'm glad Dwayne Outdoors is here. Sweet. Awesome. So perfect. I am so glad to be popping this up. I wanted to make myself available through a number of requests to become more live and interactive and sort of zoom in and focus in on people's specific questions that we, as it pertains to topics of either emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, and healing and recovery, and what that means, especially in a living, breathing, walking nature, which is translated into results for you all. So we are still a little bit raw in the process here, so getting up and running. So hey, Ginger, Henna, and Roland, good to see you all here. We definitely want to, zoom in and focus in on your topics here. Cool. So, definitely. Hey, Ginger. Yeah. So, feel free as we sort of navigate along. We'll see how long this goes. I'm not sure if we're going to go for about an hour or so. We'll see how it goes. But I wanted to really sort of kick things off with really, I was inspired by a great viewer question. And that is, how do we get over a trauma bond? Can you ever let go of a trauma bond with a narcissist? So, that really begs the question, which I think is really important, is that, with, a trauma bond, it means ultimately that you have somewhere in the course of your, emotional composite or makeup or composition, you have confused love with abuse, which means, emotional abuse generally, or physical abuse, or whatever sort of, psychological sort of manipulation tactics which can ensue in a relationship with someone who really, might have, some disorder, attachment disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, where they are sort of operating on a whole different approach that affects, oftentimes in a destructive or painful way, others emotionally. So we talk a lot, about that here on the channel and that dynamic, and really understanding what that translates and what that means for you in all of your, different settings. So yes, Samira, right, it caused a lot of mental agony. Right, it's hard to see and walk around my home to be content and happy. Well, yeah, yes, Samira, that's known as basically what I would say scorching the earth. They really try to, really degrade you and sort of scorch the very earth that you stand on, which is where you should have your I am. And as Michelle was saying in a previous live, your being ability, just to be. You don't, so a lot of people have a lot of discomfort and not only displeasure, but an emotional pain as a result of really what is known as a trauma bond. So I want to sort of, discuss that and sculpt the live here around that, because I think a lot of people will be able to relate, and and so you have to understand really what is emotional abuse and what is a trauma bond. So you have to really understand what that is. And so emotional abuse is of course you've heard about physical abuse, where someone's hitting you, slapping you, kicking, all signs of behavioral aggression that are designed to make the physical body feel injured and broken down. And what's more sad, I would say, especially in the relationship dynamic with someone who is narcissistic or psychopathic, it is designed with the end object to make you weak, to weaken you, to break you down, i.e. the opposite of strong, and, just feeling and being okay, feeling okay about yourself, safe, but, namely positive self-regard, otherwise known as self-esteem. So that is the core sort of target of the emotional abuse, which is sort of the symptom. And, emotional abuse. So when we talk about a trauma bond, being connected to somebody in a very addictive and very strong, lethal, and this is sort of very serious topic here, guys. So we might try to parody or make funny of some things, but eventually, I really want you to understand the seriousness and the gravityness of all that's going on, either on your level or the grand level, whatever level you are seeing this going on in life, which is toying with your emotions. Speaking about a lot of lies, like Dwayne Outdoors had said previously, giving you very limited or spliced and diced information. But this is all forms of emotional abuse. It's a kind of abuse that's different from physical. So we all know what physical abuse, but we're now talking about something which is emotional in nature, which is your feelings. Get over it. You might have a lot of people, oh, that was just an affair, or that was just, it is not that. That is not the case. That is not always the answer. It's more complex, and it's important because there can exist for a long period of time emotional woundedness, which is hindering to a lot of people's happiness and their ability to have a positive attachment to others and bond and connect within themselves at the individual and macro level. So it really does spill over into many areas of an individual's life. So emotional abuse, which is really where you're subjected, namely to, let's begin with verbal abuse. So verbal abuse, words can be abusive, hurtful, harmful, designed to weaken and break you down. Verbal abuse, and basically, which is constant criticism, constant criticism. So if somebody, like, as if we discuss here on the channel, so a narcissistic relationship, where they are trying to carve and create and shape the dynamics, which is having power and control over others, particularly after emotional abuse. So you cannot participate from an I am standpoint, which is based in strength and happiness. This is something that is this is this is the target. This is where the disease begins. This is very important that you understand this foundation of the pattern of a trauma bond, especially as it is exhibited by a narcissist or a psychopath. So we're talking really then about the verbal, and there might be physical abuse where, there's been hitting, slapping, etc., aggression, which of course is designed to weaken you down and of course elicits fear and anxiety. And then, the complicit, which means but then if that person also is the same person who, i.e., quote unquote, gives you love, i.e., bears your children, is on your mortgage, is your business partner, is your spouse, is your significant other, then a lot of people then have to live in denial and sort of live in denial that there is of an emotional abuse. So that's part of the trauma bond, is that one must live in denial. So we're going to get to that, but emotional abuse, is where they really sort of try to grind you down, find fault, find fault with, mimicking you, belittling you, berating you. This is emotional abuse. This is, this goes on, and whether a lot of people have shrugged it off or say it's inconsequential, that's just how this person is, that is a big old fat lie. That is nonsense. Intimidation. If someone's trying to intimidate you, through the crazy making you feel fearful, and really refusal to ever be pleased. Refusal, no matter what you do, it is never good enough. They refuse to be pleased. So there's this constant sort of, keeping a dark cloud over you. This is emotional abuse. You have to understand that this is then part of the trauma bond. But then people find them inextricably. It helps to keep the narcissist protected. You are correct, Ginger. You are absolutely right. So people then, like a Stockholm syndrome, they then shut their own heart down, shut their own feelings down because it's so too painful, too difficult. Oftentimes, results in huge epiphanies or awakening to the fact that there is not love present which can oftentimes be too much for that person to bear. I.e., they find that they're, in a house where, somebody is subjecting them to this, but then also, given the occasional intermittent reinforcement or reward, here's your dinner, here's your shelter, or so there's this intermittent then reward, which people then crave, and then so they try to shut down, and like you're saying, they try to protect the abuser, identify with them, and then sort of swallow the big, the horse pill that, there is something inherently wrong with you and you better just shut up and put up. And then so they always keep you on the end of weakness. So they create the context of weakness and then blame that is your problem. So in other words, you sort of get taken advantage of, or what is known as sort of exploited. People don't know better. People don't, oftentimes come into this earth, knowing what they're going to find themselves in until, and like Big Daddy's saying, build your self-esteem. That's exactly what we're talking about, which is, and the Stockholm syndrome is right. It's sort of identifying with the abuser and then sort of making yourself subject to their whims and wills, and just being like sort of passively complicit with them, not being able to stand up to them, not being able to get a word in edgewise because they're not able to engage in that type of communication, because that would mean being equal. That would be meaning respecting, but they need to have oftentimes this person in order to take their aggressions out of. So it becomes utilitarian for them. And the problem with a trauma bond, hey Paul T, I'm glad you're here, with a relationship, is that then you have to live in denial that this is taking place. So it becomes too overwhelming. What has just sort it all out. In other words, people find themselves in an emotional quicksand. You can't get a foothold. If you've ever seen quicksand, it just sort of it just sort of swallows you up. So they really feel engulfed, enmeshed, or swallowed up by sort of within the criticism. In other words, there might have been something that they have idealized in this individual during the love bombing, which is they're always trying to get back to that sort of stage where everything is okay, but that is not oftentimes a permitted state. To go back, so emotional abuse is always sort of never being pleased. In other words, their unhappiness is a way for them to, always keep unhappiness and then that abusive pattern in place where you're getting all the negativity. And, so they will then create that, this then forms a whole bundle of negative self-limiting beliefs within the target of that dynamic. So negative self-limiting beliefs, which then keep you sort of stuck in a trauma bond, unable to get out. In other words, right, rather than being supported and being acknowledged and validated for who you are, you don't get to have that experience. You don't. And I knew this was going to fall. I have a very delicate situation here with my paintings. This poor guy. Okay. Well, we're gonna set that aside. I might have to take the other one down. We are still getting used to it, guys. But the issue is that it's designed to make you weak. And so, your strength, your I am, is sort of a prohibited or forbidden state. That is part of the object of emotional abuse. It's to, allow them to continue to have that power or control over something. And, that oftentimes is very disabling to people if they cannot think for themselves or uphold their own boundaries and standards. So you become really sort of marginalized in the relationship. Marginalized meaning, you're not really looked at with respect. You're not listened to. Things become very caustic. And so, how, like our viewer had said then also, that they're in a very toxic situation. So toxicity then again is then coming back to that trauma bond, which is confusing abuse with love. So love really is acceptance in the cessation of fear. If you then have been around a narcissist who sort of tries to use that dynamic where they, you can't quite, they're not quite all there, and then you're sort of always pining to get to the bottom, the top, the left, or the bottom of something. You're always in that struggle, and you become then distracted from your own truth in that process. So part of the healing is then being able to look squarely in the face of all that chaos and to say, I see my healthy pattern here, and to realize what is emotional abuse and then its impact and how it exists and causes you to feel, and understand the cause that creates that effect. So you don't have to continue to hold on your I am to that existence in a relationship. Because your I am, once you're in a relationship, right, the constant confusion, exactly. Like we're saying here in emotional abuse, part of the indicators are that of constant criticism, intimidation, sort of those very sort of out of control, very moody, the moodiness, the lability, meaning that there's never any sort of stability or coming to terms, which is the absence of fear, which really is love. And love, which means that there is trust, and it means a lot of different things, but namely in emotional abuse, in a trauma bond, people then equate their own pain with importance in a relationship. So their love relationship does not feel right if it doesn't have that element of pain, or where they're sort of not accepted, and then they become really attracted to this because they become a perfect energetic match. So you have to be able to detach from the body-mind connection that relationship had created in you. So it's almost as if you were wearing a different emotional shoe, if you will, in that period of time and space. Because the trauma bond, it creates an instability and a lack of strength within you, which is part of the design. It is part of the design to keep you hidden, to keep you unaware, to keep you just sort of not included. It's a very exclusive relationship you'll find with a narcissist, because they'll try to create the environment that they should only need to associate with certain types of people, situations, and things, which is really all they see is their desire. And oftentimes, when we talk about a trauma bond, I want you to also understand, right, everything is someone else's fault, but also realize that there can be a lot of other substances going on which perpetuates this trauma bond. Hard liquor, drugs, when people are drinking, especially the hard stuff, I think it also tends to create and incite and inflame a lot more of that very volatile criticism that people see. So they have other things going on, not only besides the emotional abuse. There's, hiding and withholding of information. There's lack of support, where they are unable to be supportive of you, just acknowledging and validating and seeing you for who you are. We're talking about emotions here. So it's very, it becomes very, we're talking about the intangibles of who you are. And that is the walking on eggshells. Yes, Ricky. Right. Bombarded hard. And then, the whole goes silent. And yeah, so the walking on eggshells, which means basically you've had to agree that nothing can satisfy them, but you stick around with the hope of succeeding, with maybe they will change. Maybe if I, become pleasing enough to them, that the abuse will change. So in the Stockholm syndrome and in that trauma bond, people then begin to sort of try to placate or please or keep happy the abuser, which can mean also self-sabotage in the same breath. So you might find yourself in a disempowered state as a result of trying to appease or please an abuser. because you have given into that cycle. And oftentimes that was a required or survival state. In other words, one might have found themselves in a situation where there was no other choice than to endure and to suffer the emotional abuse, meaning you could not get out of it. I mean, that is the whole essence of the Stockholm syndrome. The bank in Sweden, where these poor individuals at this bank, I guess, were taken, and you can research this, but they were taken hostage by these individuals, and then eventually these individuals made it seem like they were taking it over for these people who they had threatened for their own best interest, and they had brainwashed them and gaslighted them, basically planted, once they were then captive, they were then made vulnerable and were in my viewpoint, you'd be very susceptible to planting the seeds of emotional abuse and sort of getting them to sort of detach from their own reality and instead only seeing things from the abuser's point of perspective. So you end up giving up your perspective in order to survive. This is a survival mechanism, y'all. So it's not like, this is an automatic process. Just like fleeing from a running bear, you have self-preservation at your core. So that's, oftentimes, your boundaries, well, that's because you're not even permitted to have that. So where the boundaries are within, and then you're indexing on your own values. So in other words, you are complicit with being, not valued. You then are complicit in your own disempowerment. You then become automatically complicit in your own denial. So you then become an active participant in your own denial and your own self-sabotage, and sort of really becoming engulfed by that fear. So then that becomes the engine, or really the fuel that runs the engine of people's lives. That is your energy, which is emotion, which is your energy in motion. And sort of things, exactly, stop UK marriage fraud. So they have, this is usually done with a design, maybe it was due to a marriage or something, but there is a pre-calculated and determined, they're setting an emotional minefield in a trauma bond. So in the Stockholm syndrome, those people who were captive, they couldn't get away. These people were then brainwashed into, this doesn't have your best interest. So then they were able to, and then do the work for the robbers, and they end up like, getting on their sides. They ended up siding with them. So you might call that really sort of what the flying monkeys are like. So you might encounter a lack of support through and through in whatever system you find yourself in. So to break free from that trauma bond, and really healing, is to understand what is abuse and to understand and own what you have been subjected to. Oftentimes it is so painful that people do not want to acknowledge that reality. It is too big, it is too hurtful, they can't swallow it, because I feel oftentimes there's a then resistance because they don't feel that they have what it takes to make it through. They don't have the conviction, the wherewithal, they don't have the confidence, they don't have the self-esteem. It is punishment, yes. So in other words, people then confuse punishment with love. And this becomes especially lethal and addictive. So swallowing the lies and then living into that fantasy that they have created, you are then buying into that. And you are then allowing yourself to be a participant in that punishment cycle. In other words, that you will have to then subdue yourself and become complicit with the own punishment. And then people become the whole self-sabotaging, becoming wounded, becoming weaker, learned hopelessness. I mean, so that becomes a very degraded and destructive state. It is lethal and addictive, yes. So you have to realize that there is an addiction, and real love will not be that. Yeah, there might be disagreements, but real love is patient and it is kind. It is accepting and it is unconditional. which means it's not based on specific things that are out of your control. So people end up giving up control to an abuser, i.e., siding with the confusion that they might know best, or and then give over their authority rather than being able to have their own authority established, their own, and having their own needs met. So they end up satisfying the needs and being attuned to the needs of the abuser and putting their needs first. Well, if they need that, I must, and it becomes all about satisfying their needs to keep at least some degree of sanity or sanctum in the relationship. So people then become complicit, I would say in the beginning, unknowingly, and then living in a hurt manner for a long period of time. And they will obsess about money, of course, because to them, money is prestige, money is power. If they can hoard more of it and then be able to, prance that around, it's a tactic or tool of manipulation, and which oftentimes has no bearing on anything. The whole money thing. When you really think about it, because what is it more things, which are oftentimes they will then equate their power with, if they can, especially like you're saying in marriages or divorces or what have you, that they are going to take possession of this. This is mine, 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 mine. So that's how they edge you out. So people feel very shut out, edged out, and shut down. That is really a topic. If that is your encounter, that is emotional abuse. You need to see it and know it for what it is. Emotional neglect, not attending to your emotional needs. Just sort of, your emotional needs, like I think Eddie's mom was saying, you are too sensitive. That's just a big, put that into word salad, which is, I don't have, you are unimportant. You are too sensitive, i.e., you are unimportant. I mean, you have to be able to translate what some of these, what the constant criticism is about, and then, so, and they will, whatever, to feign their influence over others. So, they have an insatiable need for power and control over others. So oftentimes that is required that you become complicit or go along with their emotional abuse. And, the important thing is that you realize you can get out of it, even though if it seems impossible, difficult, it will never happen. The truth of the answer is yes, you do own your strength. You do know right from wrong. But maybe you weren't allowed to live in that reality because it was too painful. I mean, it's just like a child, waking up to an abusive family. If you're age 9, it's very difficult to go and make it on your own at, say, not age 9 or 10. So in other words, people, or I know we have a lot of viewers who find themselves in marriages where they're also financially dependent and they can't just up and leave, so they're even more of a trauma bond. So, it's very, important that you realize where those trauma bonds stay connected. And oftentimes emotional abusers will keep those, I would say, those sort of strings in place so as to be able to use that for manipulation at some point, which gives you the disempowered perspective. So you have to stop, being complicit with them having power over you. And that, for a lot of people, that might be scary, because to them that means understanding that you are responsible and you deserve the best, and that you deserve respect, and you deserve to live in being empowered, and having things what is just and fair treatment, not being subjected to unfair and unjust treatment, and being that scorched earth, where they have sort of or the smear campaign, which is another tactic of the trauma bond to keep the pattern in place. If they can continue the emotional abuse, which is really what the smear campaign is, it's a form of emotional abuse. Yeah, and they will make, they will try to create a moral enemy for you in this existence. And I would not recommend that you harbor the anger of an abuser. I would not recommend that you harbor the bitterness of an abuser in your own port. Realize you have your own port, you have your own emotions, which you need to then understand it's important for you to protect yourself rather than protect the abuser. I think a lot of times in the trauma bond, people are so brainwashed or numbed out that they're only hearing the commands of what the abuser wants. Do this, do that, and sort of, become numb to it. So you've got a lot of these, sort of sheeple, walking around blindly. Those are the flying monkeys. So I know a lot of viewers use that terminology. So we'll just sort of try to make a connection there, if you will understand. So the flying monkeys will also keep that trauma bond in place. To me, yes, but maybe everyone has been traumatized, and we are the few that are aware of it. Well, Big Daddy, it's the problem is that the trauma is then reinforced and continued in these relationships. So people that are living in abusive relationships, which they cannot flee or leave from, this becomes a very, they then try to coin you a loser, coin you weak, coin you this, you're disenfranchised, disinvested in, whatever all the terminology, you have to realize, that they are the big hat syndrome, big hat, no cattle. That is the big ego, that they try to keep that as, the crazy making reality, which people then continue to find themselves in. So the whole problem is that it's very difficult to break free and then be in relationships then which are healthier and are surrounded by people who acknowledge and validate the strength in you and are not threatened by doing that. The narcissist is usually threatened by validating the strength in you, and definitely when it comes with a psychopath, that is all a phony persona from the get-go. I mean, from days, weeks, and hours before and years before they even met you, they had already designed all this. So people don't stand a chance when you're up against a psychopath. They can, these people are not to be played with at all. I mean, so you just have to understand that a lot of times people in a trauma bond will get, and protect their abuser, and try to, sort of create a reaction formation and then support their abuser. In other words, they will keep it going. They cannot see any other way out other than to then conform to the needs of the abuser and just give in until at some point people then generally wake up and they go, wow, why do I have nothing? Why am I underrepresented? Why do I not belong? And they feel that they don't have a sense of belonging or community or happiness, their needs being met. They feel isolated, I think is a big, or invisible is a big word that a lot of people will use here on the channel, and rob you of your happiness and support, of course, because their happiness becomes, in flawed thinking, the center of all that is important. So they want people to be complicit with making them happy. So giving in, basically being pushed around, just going along with it. Don't speak up, just go along with it. That is wrong. You do not go along with abuse. You do not remain silent. You do not remain complicit. Silence is acceptance. And if you are that, then you're reinforcing your own emotional abuse, and then you will find yourself self-sabotaging and wanting to get a handle on things. In other words, this is no longer a way for me to live. And I especially feel it's all about them. Yes, everything will be about them. Your birthday will be about them. Your job promotion, it will be about them. Your my nose itches. Anything will eventually be about them. So they sort of scorch the earth. They try to, be sort of take, I would say, sort of try to ride the coattails of other people. In other words, they always try to one up and then make, everything, then, so you're not allowed to have your own perspective, as Dwayne Outdoors would say, to be seen and heard. You don't have that experience. So what is the difference if you could do a body scan, what it feels like when you are seen and heard and respected? Okay, what does that feel like? Has anybody been heard, seen, and respected? Let's just kind of try to get back to one of those moments for you all, where you sort of, you felt like, there was that presence. Okay, and then what does emotional abuse feel like in your body when you're being disrespected? And what does that sound like? What does that feel like? What does that look like? I mean, you could call that triggering, but the problem is that they are then creating a button within you that they can just go, oh, look, I got a response. Look, I got a response. So the narcissist and the psychopath is all sort of about designing the chessboard, which oftentimes people find themselves to be a piece on their chessboard, which is not your own. But they're sort of being, sort of pushed around and manipulated according to the needs of this person, which is part of the negating of yourself to be complicit. So you have to really give up a lot in order to that, and depersonified. Yes, Ricky Todd, depersonified. So that is why why people victims of this, and it doesn't make you weak, crazy, that you will never heal, that this is a life sentence, all these things, because the intimidation, they will continue to use that and try to keep a dark cloud over you for no reason other than for them to feel better about themselves and to get what they want. Remember, all the narcissists, they do not have empathy. All they do see is what they want. And they do not have that. And so a lot of people find themselves living, breathing in those relationships, where they are then becoming, sort of as that pawn, and to try to please them and to avoid, being punished by their wrath. So, right. And, they're jealous as well. So these are the people who, want only for themselves and not want for others. And that is, disrespect. That is emotional abuse. So if people find themselves coming from a place of weakness, realize that is learned. You had to learn that in the course of your emotional development. In relationships, you had learned to not speak up. You learned to shut it, become invisible. You learned to endure, and that there was no interaction. There was no ability for you to speak up. So you did not get a chance to practice or realize that and live and breathe in that strength and have that part of you validated. So it's very important for you to recover that aspect of you. You really need to understand that that's already built in. I mean, all the wiring and all the, is within you, but it's oftentimes an emotional state that is not encouraged, rewarded, so it is weakened by default. And this is how, it becomes very easy then for a manipulator to continue manipulation if they have found someone who is then addicted or found themselves addicted to this type of relationship, which is fused with a lot of pain and abuse as confused with love. So it's a very, very different sort of relationship. And the diminishment, the negative looks, the keeping you in the dark, just acting as if you are the problem is really a testimony that the relationship is not in the open. And then there is this sort of distrustfulness that the narcissist will use to manipulate. It's part of an emotional abuse in my viewpoint. Which is if they can, make the fear, obligation, and guilt, if they can keep you under their control through fear, obligation, and guilt, they will plant the seeds of this within you. So you have to understand that this is so you have to undo. You have to realize what is the cause that creates the trauma bond, and then the effect, which is like the isolation, feeling unmotivated, feeling unenthusiastic, not being able to live your passions, not being able to smile. It's like having a snake that has bitten your arm. You can't shake it loose. That is very, very true. Exactly. They have their clenches in you, but only you can back away. So in other words, realize that they have only sort of bit your outer skin. To go on with that, they've only bit the outer skin of your emotional body. So you have to realize that your emotions have a body to them. They have substance, breath, they have energy. Oftentimes you can feel people's emotions from 8 to 9 feet away. You can feel the presence of love, or you can feel the presence of patience. You can feel, and you don't have to be taught this. Might be something that you know in your heart and you can trust. But that connection is severed when you're in and your needs are not met. You're not given the ability to sort of live in that full emotional body. So understand though that an abuser, to me, they really only have the ability to sick that, to use that analogy of literally no emotions. Exactly. No positive emotions, no smiles, no validation, nothing. They can't reflect the positive back to you because they don't have any empathy. So it is just a loss, but you end up paying the price. So, part of, right, and getting a stomach ache. Yeah. So, right, Eliza, Ashley. So your stomach ache. So you have to understand your body is trying to speak to you. So part of, especially, I feel that through this whole pandemic, is like learning to understand and translate the feelings in your body, your own emotions, especially when it's that of pain. That is one of dis-ease or lack of ease. And so oftentimes that is a result of knowing that there is this trouble, but that you have to be able to put peace, acceptance, and strength where that pain is, and understanding what is that strength. And oftentimes it is being able to get through the denial of your own strength, because a narcissist will have you live in denial of your own strength because it is utilitarian and practical for them. So realize the narcissist, all they see is what they desire. So if you can be unhappy and then work hard enough to please them, then you've just been part of their tactical pleasure. You have been used in that. So it is very difficult to sort of opt out of that once you have opted in for so long. I would say it doesn't feel right, but the body is trying to make it important and to acknowledge, and for maybe for the first time in your life. I mean, you might acknowledge for the first time in your life, what does personal autonomy and strength and independence feel like? What does having confidence and positive self-regard, or even protecting self, feel like? And so oftentimes the contrary was meant to feel opposite. That you're always meant to stay in this wounded, and that people then confuse woundedness with being motivated for love. And then the trauma bond is then where you're still allowing that woundedness to continue. You do have to heal from that. I would say most definitely, without a doubt, that is part of the ploy, but they won't allow you to see it, because to them, then that would be a giveaway. And this is, it becomes destructive. It becomes really against what a lot of people might say. This feels evil. This person, this felt so wrong. It felt so destructive, so hurtful. I mean, so these, but they will not be able to validate that for you because they don't have empathy. So it's very difficult to have a sharing of the emotions in this relationship with people, because they are not open. They are not emotionally available. And also, they might not be emotionally intelligent enough. All they want is what they want, and they will do whatever it takes. So you might have an inkling or a spark, I would say, some point in the relationship where you saw the blue sky, where you saw the reality. But you might have seen that at a difficult time when you didn't have enough emotional foothold enough to know what to do at that time. It's just like a survival camper. You can watch all those, especially now, they've got these survival campers and the stealth campers, but if you're being attacked, or you're camping out in the woods, you might hit paralysis, like Pete Walker, in his book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. You might hit that deer in the headlights moment where you're unable to act. Like your body literally goes into a freeze mode. I mean, this is a natural built-in self. Your body is trying to work on your behalf. Like life is working in your behalf. Life is conspiring to support you. But if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you might then be led to believe that life is conspiring against you. Nothing works out. You can't get the open doors. You can't get and so you might then believe, and then a lot of people then feel paranoid or disempowered. They then believe that life is conspiring against them, that they won't have a chance. This is the trauma bond. And they're very capable of, Nancy, you are correct as well. And this is the very hideous aspect is that of that sexual violation of young children, the inappropriateness unequivocally is part of a narcissistic, or I would even say more of a psychopathic. If you are getting into that, I think you're getting into the very malignant, Nancy, or the psychopathic when we're talking about that. So you really have to go gulp. I know what I am dealing with here. Even though if this is big or difficult or a lot for you to understand, it might take some time for you to understand and get a grip. And oftentimes it's so difficult to digest emotionally that you might be emotionally sick. Vomiting, nauseous, a stomach ache, a nervous stomach, a nervous situation. You're nervous, you're scared and you don't know why. You have insomnia and you don't know why. You are restless, and then then you feel that life is just, sort of channeling you into an alley. And it's just like really great. I just want to sort of, put out there, that Paul Simon song, and The Sound of Silence. If you all could have a time, and shout out to the gal who did my hair in Chicago. I don't even want to give that away, but just shout out to the gal who brought up this song in the course of while she's doing my hair. Just a beautiful song, and it's like a throwback to the 60s, Paul and Simon, the song, The Sound of Silence. If you, and then, you have to really realize that this is serious. So you have to come to brightness. You have to come to light and let that be your friend, and realize that you do have a friend outside of this abuse. You do have a friend in yourself outside of this abuse. It might be the very first, most gentle, most ginger or delicate relationship is the one that you find with yourself after encountering emotional abuse, physical abuse, manipulation, deception, mind games, the brainwashing, the gaslighting, the constant criticism, namely that of emotional abuse. It is what it is. This is not a laughing matter. And they cause you, right, to become introverted, but you have to begin to understand that there is a certain disempowerment that you have to acquiesce to in order to stay in an abusive relationship. If you're going to stay there, you will not know what is going on because they won't clue you in. Reactive. Yes. So reactive, which means, it's just you did not know better than to be reactive, and you don't realize, but that you are then complicit. You are, they will begin with the very subtle, I would say, commands, and they will command you to feel less than. So, and to always put them, and really without your, I would say without your consent, which is the problem, which is the manipulation, where they will give commands for you to do things. And even though you don't want to, you should not be in that disempowered, which is reactive rather than responsive. Responsive means to say no. I will not subject myself to that. No, I will not go along with that. No, that is, so a lot of people have difficulty saying no to an abuser. They prefer to feel, they feel protected by the abuse because it is predictable. They have something. They have the abuse rather than being alone or being able to, embrace their own strength. So it becomes even more painful then for people to embrace their own strength. It becomes shaky ground, baby. Their knees are quaking. They get the pit in their stomach. Right. And so it becomes beyond and insidious and start to feel life is against right. If you're stuck, you are not stuck. Do not fall for the bait that you are stuck, because you are not. Right. It's questioning yourself, wondering what we did to deserve this, and right, like as if you had deserved this treatment. That is really harkens back, Dwayne Outdoors, to the definition of trauma bonding and emotional abuse, that you had then, agreed to the fact that you deserve to be punished. In other words, you're validating this negative sense of self, which was instilled, which is very difficult to live with. It can only, I would say it's not sustainable. And you did not have to go along silently, buttoned with your lip, not speaking up. You might have had to endure that because there was no option. It's like a deer, the headlight just showed up. I mean, and so people then are always in a reactive state rather than a responsive state. So that comes back to that internal locus of control. And it is sad. It is very sad. But realizing, that not all love is lost. So you might feel that you're losing control to this person. This is what it feels like. It's just kind of like you're just, the big raging river is just running away with your life possessions or your family or your support system. And this is what they want. Unfortunately, when it gets to that degree, you're talking about a psychopath, really, not just you, but they have a little bit of pleasure in seeing others suffer. This is part of the trauma bond. This is what people get addicted to. This is what they don't realize that they are becoming addicted to and then becoming made an unknowing victim of. And that then people might then wake up, sometime on down the road. It might be 5, 10, 15, or 20 years later when they realize and expose a psychopath for who and what they are. And it becomes very insidious, and it is very sad. But you don't have to, that is a feeling. But realize that doesn't have to be the truth. If other people are allowing their lives to be scourged or ravished or run by a psychopath, then, you oftentimes then might feel that you want to rescue the drowning, rescue the suffering. I mean, it's only a natural human instinct to be sensitive to that. But unfortunately, with trying to rescue the drowning man, oftentimes they will take others down with them because this is what they do. They will, funnel everything to please them. And it does not have anything to do with any sort of moral, just foundation. It oftentimes is very immoral, and what a lot of people do feel becomes criminal in nature, meaning it becomes that of real unlawfulness, emotional abuse, where things, people then feel unloved, and then that whole sort of then becomes an apathy, and then they don't ever seek even a positive attachment with self. They're unable then to connect with others. They feel very untrusting because so much of their experience with relationships has been violated, and that violation energy, which then belays or breaks trust. And if you don't have that trust, then you don't have that safety. You don't have that functionality. You don't have that health. So really it becomes important that, you're able to identify the unhealth from the health. And you might be the one who is starting to designate what health is. So oftentimes for someone who has been in an abusive relationship, it is difficult to be, i.e., a leader, to believe in self and to trust self. So to, even if that had, so realize that that is then part of the healing, is that then that it is the healing, part of the healing is to then be able to establish that trust and knowing within, and that you are, then uplifting and eliminating those negative self-limiting beliefs, because they will keep that smallness, they will keep that victimhood alive and running for you as long as you allow, which means as long as you become sort of, non-aware of it and engage in it, then you are giving in. So it is not in your best interest to maintain those negative self-limiting beliefs that were really sort of set up. You have to disturb that. You have to realize that you not sticking up is to be complicit, and and they then are sort of ruling the roost through anger and intimidation. Those who create the fear, those are the people who are the manipulators. That is, I mean, I don't. This probably goes back centuries, probably most of human history. Those people who can cause fear and intimidation will be the ones to rule for so how long, until you realize, no, that is not my rule. That is not the rule. That is made, to be, for your end, and it is not correct. So, right, trust God and trust self. Right, but where is that made the popular thing to do? Especially it is not reinforced in the relationship. You might even feel that the relationship is godless or unholy in nature. You might feel that this person is dirty. You might feel that this person is ugly from within, even though they might have this sort of superficial ego or persona or mask, that they appear to be, attractive, or what they think is. So there might be an ugliness within, and you don't know how to acknowledge that. And a Right, and calming the mental health. Right, so awesome. Yeah, definitely share your tools and tactics for keeping calm. As I was thinking the other days, when we don't trust ourselves, we need to put our trust. We tend to put our trust in others, exactly, Duane Dura, but the trust we put in these types is actually not trust. It's hope designed as trust due to our wounds. That is correct. So you keep sort of investing in the narcissist, and sort of simultaneously disinvesting in yourself. So you cannot simultaneously, do that. And so, and sort of realizing that, realizing that that is where you have to come to putting that trust in self. The narcissist, that is like a forbidden state when you're in a relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath, is sort of not being able to feel that connection to something bigger than them. So when people talk about a narcissist, they think that maybe their life is enlarging, but oftentimes it's getting smaller. You are limiting yourself by the limits that are inherent within that type of relationship. Narcissist relationships are very limiting, I would say, by design, because they are lacking empathy. So, in other words, they are dismissing you without, you even doing anything. So people then feel blind in plain sight. They feel unheard or unlistened to in earshot. It's because this is just how I would say the feeling is when you're around someone who has put up a false wall or a false persona for others, which is known as projection, and then triangulation. So I would say if you have found yourself in these relationships, there are some key concepts that you need to understand. You really do need to understand what is emotional abuse, and they won't, and you need to understand this. So you don't need to prove an event and justify with anybody else. You must understand what is emotional abuse, what is, what is disempowerment, what is having insecurity or a lack of positive self-regard, and why is this so? So these are the big questions. So in the privacy of your heart, you have to understand, if you had learned this, that this was a reaction, but you are mature now, some time has passed, some emotional different experiences have passed for you to be able to see it now, um, and and to then be willing to get back into a little bit more self-trusting state, which is a positive sense of a positive sense of self, which is not what you are allowed to exist in a relationship with a narcissist. You cannot simultaneously have a positive sense of self and be in a relationship where there is abuse and hatred. I mean, so if the unfortunate thing is, these relationships, they allow hatred to enter into their house. They allow this to fester. They allow judgment to prevail. They allow flawed thinking. They allow, lack of empathy to become addictive. So they become addicted to this lack of empathy and sort of that buzz of fantasy that the relationship with a narcissist will cause people to just fall for, not stand for, fall for. So either, so it's understanding, what does it even mean just to stand? I mean, so you just have to have an ability to stand. I mean, we're talking about some very core physiological states, which are standing in a state of trust, which means, a sort of reliability you can rely on, and finding, and then gratitude. Rely on yourself, and instead, not the indirect, part of the emotional abuse, I would say, is the passive aggressive indirect form of communication that narcissists will use. Just giving very limited information, being sort of left out of things, being made fun of, for being different, not being accepted because you are different. Maybe you don't have the same amount of money as this individual. Maybe you have a different, you're working and they don't have to work. Maybe, there's all sorts of different things which you have been reflected back negatively to disempower you and to weaken you. And so, you take that at face value, which is in the corporate world also, especially, Eliza, you have to understand that oftentimes that emotional diseducation, has to be kept and swept into part of that culture oftentimes, where you are not allowed that transparency. A lot of things are just because, you don't know why this was done and why you are being harmed, but just swallow the harm and suffer you must. So then people end up, feeling that they're not really living their passion, anymore, or why are we here? So it's important to get the work done. Will the work ever be done? Yes, it will. Will you get a better perspective on it? Yes, you will. But realize that oftentimes that is interwoven in the fabric. So people might find themselves in a relationship where they're not able to earn the money. They're not able to go out and travel. They're not able to be disempowered and independent by design. This is, so in other words, you end up, feeling that you are carrying this through your entire life. Is there anybody who wants to carry the pain through their entire life? Anybody? Is there, I'll just put a quick question and answer out there for engagement. Is there anybody who feels that it is better to live in fear and pain rather than peace and strength. Does anybody, okay, we got to know. Okay, right. So, exactly. So you have to understand then the very beginning inner workings of manipulation, and where people then give up their personal power. They are then giving their personal power away. Okay. But you are behaving like you were trained. Okay. So it's time then to get a new trainer. Heck yeah, it's time to get a new trainer. So you have to understand that you are like literally trained to feel and behave in a way perhaps that does not match your physiology, that does not match a positive self-esteem for you, and as if having positive self-esteem is a crime. That's essentially what it is. Happiness is you're caught being happy. That is so do it is very important, and really look at and evaluate to the degree and percentage of your day, week, and hour that is spent in fear and anxiety, in fear of the unknown, the uncertainty, the wrath, especially that is put into motion by an individual in this earth plane. So you have to understand, we're talking about, you have the right to your own emotions, and you have the right to be able to manage them. You have the right to be able to understand them. You have the right to be able to have, identify these and then take off wrong labels so that are instilled based on judgment. Hey, Paul. Hey, I'm glad you got in, and I'm glad you're able to jump in on this. So, right. So if you are, you have to look at the percentage of your day. Right, Ricky Todd, every minute of every day. I mean, this is, like living in the fight or flight. So that's why we hear so much like about, I would say, like the adrenal fatigue, that whole concept of, adrenal fatigue, which has been born out of the, recent years and decades. This is a stress reaction, a stress reaction. So it's not, but what is a stress response? So in other words, are you better equipped to actually handle it? The reaction loop will continue. So people are living reactive, and oftentimes to be appease an abuser, which, people then don't feel that they are in alignment with their own strength anymore. So it is important to be in alignment with your strength, even if that state was degraded by this abuser. So how many people feel that your strength was not supported by this individual? Do you see? So in other words, to what degree was that your disempowerment and your unhappiness? In other words, there was that when you get into the psychopath and the malignant, the degree of your suffering gives them a certain degree of pleasure, and that they have power and control. So, right. So but then how many of you then reacted by being constantly supportive of them? So in other words, to keep yourself alive, you had to be in that trauma bond, which is kind of the topic of this live. You then support the abuser, which is basically what happens in the Stockholm syndrome. If you have experienced this, you really, I feel, it's very, very important for you to unpack your experiences and really to be able to face this with a degree of gentleness and compassion, and know that you are coming out on the side of strength rather than giving your power away and being complicit with abuse. Because that is where you will, people, cry. They can't stop crying. I mean, this sick to your stomach, right? I mean, you feel sick, you are not eating well, you can't feed oneself, one cannot take care of themselves, they feel emotionally hurt. It becomes an obstacle. It's kind of like, a hurt stomach. You're trying to get through a rope and it keeps catching you on the stomach. And so that's kind of what it is. They're trying to cut you off at the gut. But if you have flying monkeys, then there aren't enough then to validate your perspective. So you'll find that you will not have a support system in them, especially if this is supposed to be, at your work or in your family. There is a lack of, there is the opposite of support. That is, what would be the opposite of support? Anybody have a word for that? Gaslighting. Okay, you need to understand the word gaslighting. You need to understand what is negative, I would say negative validation. Yeah, and that growing part of yourself gets stunted. The wounded inner child, sabotage. Yes, Ernesto. Sabotage, exactly. And gaslight, they will sabotage you. Yes, so in other words, to sabotage, which means to muddle or befuddle, which means, to make you confused, to make you go, what? To make you go, and to be hurt. So if it is an old military term, and then also sabat, I think, was a type of shoe. In other words, you can research the definition of that, but it is very important because we're talking about some very core concepts here that will affect the direction and your life experience. So to undo the self-sabotage, you have to realize that it becomes an automatic process if you've been around them. So people will, become alcoholic. These are destructive, the substance abuse disorders, very destructive. Drinking hard liquor, lots of hard liquor. And thanks to society, we have, God love Tommy Lee, but, of course, he's the coolest thing, and he talks about how, he drank 2 of those big jugs, quarts, what have you. I don't know if they're gallons. I do not drink the hard stuff at all. But, he drank 2 of those a day. We're talking about some destructive behaviors here. So you have to understand clearly what is destructive and what is constructive or productive behavior for you. And put yourself first. Oftentimes that is a new position for a lot of people who have come out of relationships. They don't feel comfortable being number one. They don't feel comfortable and trust themselves. They don't own their reality. They can't own what happened. They are owned by the trauma bond. They are owned by the denial. They are owned by the learned helplessness. They are learning to limit and become sabotaging. Around addicts, we need recovery too. They become family diseases. Yes, Ginger, we are talking about family diseases. I am so glad you brought that term up. That is so cool. Because if you study alcoholism, alcoholism is generally a family disease. If you have a spouse or a sibling, or it becomes a family disease. So there is no doubting that. And narcissism is the same way. It does become a family disease. It does become something that all people are dragged into. Where there is undeniable problems and trouble. The alcoholic who, is blacking out. You have to take care of them. This is scary. The narcissist who checks out on you, the psychopath who checks out on you, who, does not give you any positive self-regard, who, has, said mean or hurtful things to you, who perhaps has been physically or emotionally abusive, beaten you down. This is what they do. If we get into the psychopath, and these, hereditary, these can be hereditary or generational cycles of abuse. In other words, this might be on in your family or your community or wherever it is. So it's okay for you to be like, the buck stops here. and to be able to have positive self-regard. You have to be able to give that to yourself if it was not given to you by a trauma bonded type of relationship, where you learn to identify with the abuser and learn to appease and support and take care of them as they preside over you. So it's just like in in the Stockholm syndrome, and those bank robbers who took over that bank, they were like the caregivers of those people who they took hostage. And so those people began to be complicit, and then be able to, they then validated the side of the abuser, that they were right for taking over the bank. We will help you. I mean, this is brainwashing and gaslighting. This is when people then become brainwashed and gaslighting. They find that they become doing things in their life that they are not aware of. Um, you know, um, and they, you might find yourself, beaten down. And so beaten down, which means, in other words, then all, especially in the psychopath relationship, they, with, one moment here. So with my train of thought, with the psychopath relationship and that particular type of trauma bond, realize that they are pairing up abuse and punishment with love. They are confusing the two. They will, abuse you, and then you will then begin to accept abuse as love, and not be able to then think for oneself, have authority over self. And so, especially with a psychopathic relationship, you then end up becoming really, really sort of gaslighted and brainwashed, and not realizing that from that hyper arousal state that you are then becoming complicit with your own disempowerment. That is external locus of control. It becomes a real family problem. Right. Hey, that is so cool, Dwayne Outdoors. Very true how everyone is affected like the alcoholic in the family. It's like mushrooms. Above ground, we look like individuals, but underneath they're all connected to the same root or rhizome. That is a fascinating statement. I actually brought up that very point at a family meal, and or I won't even say that, but that was not to be believed. So you can bring up certain topics, even certain truths, and they will ridicule, make fun of, gaslight, or brainwash as if it is a non-reality. So you will then be swept off, oftentimes, with the degree of the emotionality. It'll be overwhelming. And then so you become complicit by just sort of reaction rather than response. That is the nature of the trauma bond. And right, all sorts of things. Right. Trees are the same way. So it's important that you understand these very working aspects within yourself, because these empowered states they cannot simultaneously exist while being abused. You can't simultaneously be empowered and emotionally abused at the same time. It's not going to work. But it's just like in the whole family with the alcoholic. It does become a family problem. And so oftentimes, it's kind of like they're just trying to act as if it is not there. Just ignore it and it'll go away. The alcoholic, no, they did not just go to the garage. They did not just go to the attic or wherever. They did not just go and then get drunk and then come back, which is usually what ends up happening. Oh, just go along with it. Just don't, just make them happy, and so then you're becoming an enabler to the disease. And then next thing you know, you are then, becoming diseased yourself. This is not, what you have, how your life has to be. It can and will get better with your choice, but you have to understand what is taking care of yourself and what is not taking care of yourself. What is self-preservation and what is self-harm? And what is a healthy relationship for you and what is an unhealthy relationship? What is hurtful and what is to be tolerated or not tolerated? Um, right. And right, the trauma bond can only function behind closed doors, the isolation manipulation tactic, exactly. So, in other words, if other people were to be there, they would be shocked. They won't be able, you living in isolation and not speaking up is part of the manipulation, not calling them out. And so you can, really, it's, if we look at, I would say, psychopathic brainwashing and then that whole psychopathic trauma bond, you become very much even more, it's more of an addiction and more of a gaslighting and brainwashing, which is then required to keep that relationship in place, where it's very, you really start getting into big time trouble with these people who really, they have a degree of an intention of a sadistic intention. In other words, if they get a little bit of pleasure out of you being harmed or hurt, or they're very parasitic in nature, which usually means there is something in their very deliberate and pre-calculated approach, which is there even before you showed up on the scene. So you need to understand sort of your innocence and the need to protect yourself rather than punish yourself in this scenario. That this was pre-calculated and premeditated before you even came on the scene. There's nothing, a psychopath, they're dealing on a whole other dimension of manipulation. They are, oftentimes very deliberately, they are very selective in the information that they will give to you, and then they're very much trying to break you down and really are testing your vulnerabilities and what makes you feel whole. They will also take advantage of people when they are lonely, down and out, all sorts of situations, and there will usually be a sob story, and that they will go into, and that you must then take care of them and then sort of side with them. That becomes part of, I would say, the love bombing, is that you then are complicit then with their authority and that you have no authority. So you're becoming authorityless, is complicit in the trauma bond, which is then, and meaning you don't have any authority. Is that really so? Is it really okay for you to have a negative sense of self-regard? And then the problem with that is that they always will break you down so that you are always thinking about them. That was the real hallmark, I would say, of a psychopath, is that they always want you to be thinking about them, and so, right. And so that you cannot take care of yourself. You cannot think about your future. You cannot think about, and they might have, being isolated. So, right, sabotage, correct. So, in other words, they will withhold to manipulate. They will make you beg. They will make you, they will get one. This is just how they will corrupt others. They will corrupt other people. It is, I would say, the core of corruption, which, let's just look up what that word, we all know what that is, but I think it's very difficult when that hits close to home, i.e. in your own home, which means there is someone who is there to defile, and just sort of work to the opposite of your best interest and open and honest communication, meaning they're operating from a prefabricated sense of pathology or projection by which they navigate everything. They stir the pot with their projection, oftentimes with nothing that has any foundation in reality. So it's having, to be corrupt is having or showing a willingness to act dishonestly in return for money or personal gain. So they will to cause to act dishonestly in return for or personal gain. So there's always something for them to gain. And you have to understand what is that. They've cost me everything. So do you see how bad this can get? So I don't talk, I talk very much about the seriousness of this. They always try to have the upper hand. Correct. Well, they will take away your hand. They will take away your upper hand, lower hand, side hand, back hand. They will try to remove your hand, period. I mean, and they will instead, part of that is then the toxic shame or toxic jealousy. So it depends on the psychopath and then their relationship. They will then plant the seeds of fighting, combativeness, and as if they are to be congratulated for being such an excellent fighter. And so really, as I say, that is their foray. Things get to be a bloody mess. And we're talking about a trauma bond, especially for people who find themselves maybe married to these people or in familiar or even work relationships or both, where, they are sort of in that very diminutive sense where they will find exactly who they need to manipulate to get their way. In other words, who is the gatekeeper? Who is, the one that they have to work? Who is it they have to manipulate? Who has the purse strings, like in an office? Who has the experience? Who has the contacts? They will then break down that person. In a family, or if there is money or something to gain, who has the money? Who has the authority? So you'll find that they will then find whatever is the quickest, shortest way to that route. If you see a psychopath in business, going right for that. Who do they have to work up to? Who do they have to treat how? How can they triangulate and create a smear campaign and then keep those, flames going? And then this is how they advance their career. This is how, they advance themselves. And so they might, win dirty. Other cultures, I know particularly in China, they will find all sorts of ways to outsmart other people and take advantage of others. Oh, I didn't know that we had to use that stamp, or this contract was not valid. I mean, you can talk about corruption in business, and you can look at that and study that, and then how businesses will do this. And so you have to understand that this is kind of like comes into your own personal well-being and your own positive sense of self-regard, which is your value of self, which is kind of like your own emotional bank balance. So do you see, how many of your emotional bank balances had to be depleted for this? And so how many have you had a increase of your emotional bank balance as a result of the relationship? Only you know, only you can attest, only you. And then you have to know that that is your truth. Even if they don't acknowledge and validate your truth, that is truth. And oftentimes there is that reality, but they will not own that. So you cannot simultaneously, you cannot simultaneously live in, disempowered and then being able to protect yourself. I mean, you have to learn. I would encourage you to learn, how that trauma bond that affects your identity and how far you go, and then the relationships, and then that you do nurture and support, that are supportive and validating of you versus to the contrary. Right. Right. And so, it's all the love we have to them. It's time to bring it back to ourselves. That is correct. You had given them a chance, given them and, too much sacrifice is usually done in the name of love with someone who has that mental sort of disorder or imbalance. We're not here to label. We're not here to diagnose. We're here to treat. We're here to help you to get an experiential understanding, and understanding really in a very applicable way that can bring positive results in your life, to make sense of things and not be sort of swept up by the sort of things that you are uncomfortable with. You do not have to proceed in relationships that make you uncomfortable. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up the live here. I hope that this has helped. Please look forward for more lives and more videos. Have a beautiful day. Take good care, and more later.